let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a massive shift in modern governance today. But before we really get into the weeds, I've got to give a huge shout out to the Autonomous Archive. Their incredible attention to detail, their due diligence, and honestly, just impeccable data mapping form the absolute backbone of what we're breaking down today. Seriously, I highly advise you to seek out their Substack, download this data for yourself, and keep it safe. The research they pulled together from hundreds of pages of procurement docs and federal contracts, it's completely vital to understanding the world we're living in right now. So let's dive into this detailed explainer on what the author calls the integrated surveillance state. Here is what we're unpacking today. First up, the integrated surveillance state itself. Then we'll map out the data supply chain, check out the border laboratory prototype, observe its diffusion into everyday life, and finally wrap up with practical steps you can take to protect your digital footprint. Section 1. The integrated surveillance state. From isolated records to unified power. Okay, let's dive into this. The foundational concept you really need to grasp here is that the era of simply collecting data, that's basically over. When we sit around debating whether our phones are monitored or our license plates are scanned, we're really just looking at the inputs. The real power now is all about how that data connects. The source calls this integrated institutional intelligence. Think of it kind of like a giant puzzle. Imagine you've got dozens of puzzle pieces scattered all over a table, right? You've got a DMV record over here, a tax filing there, and employment history somewhere else. Individually, each piece provides only a tiny sliver of information. But once they're assembled into a shared analytical framework, boom, the complete, highly actionable picture suddenly becomes crystal clear.
You know, historically, government databases were totally isolated. If an investigator wanted to connect a court document with a property record, it took a ton of red tape and a massive amount of manual human effort. And actually, that friction acted as a natural, practical limitation on government power. But today, that's totally changed. Unified administrative systems automatically identify those relationships across domains that used to be completely siloed. So the danger the Autonomous Archive is warning us about isn't just that governments possess way more information today, it's that this historic, structural limitation is steadily disappearing.
Section 2. The data supply chain, turning raw data into intelligence. Let's move to and see how this builds from the ground up. It all starts with the digital traces you generate every single day. We're talking about buying a coffee, paying a utility bill online, or just swiping a transit card. That everyday activity gets captured by sensors and forms, aggregated, and then seamlessly integrated across these vast databases. From there, algorithms step in. They analyze the patterns to assign risk, which ultimately triggers automated actions and real-world interventions. So raw data sitting on a server isn't power on its own. This automated pipeline is.
Section 3. The border laboratory prototype. Testing this system.
So, the Autonomous Archives research found something pretty fascinating here. They note that immigration enforcement essentially serves as this unprecedented, real-world laboratory for these integrated systems. Why? Well, because it forces an unusually huge number of isolated systems into one cohesive operational ecosystem. Think about it. You've got state DMVs, criminal ports, federal tax records, and even private utility companies and telecoms, all being fused together, often by private contractors using software from places like Palantir just to keep things running. There are very few other government functions out there that require this many moving institutional components to operate all at once.
And here is where it gets really interesting. Publicly, we tend to view detention as the end of the line, right? You go through identity verification, investigation, apprehension, and then finally detention. But the research points out a totally startling reality. It is absolutely not the end point. It's actually a feedback loop. Every single stage of detention generates entirely new institutional records. We're talking medical evaluations, housing assignments, transit logs. And those new records? They're fed right back into the system to fuel future algorithmic decisions. The system literally modifies itself through its own daily operations.
Section 4. Diffusion into everyday life, from the border to everywhere.
Now, zooming out to the macro level, the author documents a pretty stark warning. The logics of control that are tested at the border are rapidly spreading into our everyday lives. Predictive analytics and data fusion are quietly but surely diffusing into domestic policing, background checks for gig workers, and public health screening. The exact same architecture is being used to evaluate everything from local education threat assessments to your personal financial credit regulation. What we're seeing is that the machinery built for the margins is basically becoming the standard machinery for routine domestic governance.
What is measured can be managed, and what can be managed can be controlled.
The ultimate societal consequence detailed in the archive is a profound, chilling effect on basic civil liberties. Because these integrated systems prioritize algorithmic efficiency and risk scoring over human nuance, the Autonomous Archive argues that they inherently risk automating inequality. It concentrates power seamlessly, and crucially, without any meaningful democratic consent from the public.
Section 5. Protecting your digital footprint. Practical actions.
Let's bring this all back down to the individual level for a minute. What can you actually do to protect yourself? So the crucial point is that while no single action makes you completely invisible, implementing a few key steps absolutely raises the cost of surveillance and protects your digital autonomy. The source recommends starting with a password manager and app-based two-factor authentication. Lock down your devices by enabling full disk encryption and using privacy-focused web browsers. You should also seriously limit what you share on social media, shift your personal chats to end-to-end encrypted apps like Signal, utilize reliable VPNs with ad blockers, and aggressively opt out of third-party data broker databases. As we wrap up the analytical portion of this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question drawn directly from the core of this research. As integrated intelligence replaces isolated records, how do we actually balance administrative efficiency with the preservation of our fundamental civil liberties? It's a massive question, and it's one that will undoubtedly define the future relationship between the state and the people it governs. Something to definitely think about.
We are now www.eyesonnice.net. Easy to remember, simple to find.